Welcome to the hidden corners where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind. Welcome to Sci Fi Saturday. Today we are reading Ufo Encounters by Nigel Blundell. There is no greater fear than the fear of the unknown, and for hundreds of innocent humans, that unknown has erupted into the most traumatic experience of their lives from the great beyond of space. The terror from the skies, a specialty of science fiction writers, has become all too real for these victims. Their encounters of the too close for comfort kind with aliens from other worlds has left them scarred, both mentally and physically. For some, it may also have meant their deaths. A perfect holiday in the romantic setting of Niagara Falls was drawing to a close for Betty and Barney Hill as they drove through New Hampshire towards their home on the clear moonlit night of the 19th of September, 1961. Betty watched the dark shadows of trees dancing in the glare of the car's headlights as Barney happily motored through the Connecticut River Valley. Glancing up into the night sky, Betty was intrigued by one particularly bright star, bigger and more brilliant than the others, which, strangely, seemed to be keeping pace with their own vehicle. Finally, she persuaded Barney to take a look for himself. He pulled the car over and took out a pair of binoculars so he could get a better view. What he saw almost sent him rigid with fear. There was a fuselage, but no wings. Flashing lights, but no engine sound. A large, moving, flying object, but no rational explanation. In the darkness of the lonely road, he and his wife were being pursued by an alien spaceship. Barney and Betty leapt into their car and continued on as the object disappeared from sight behind a hill. Then suddenly it reappeared directly in front of their car, only 100 yards away. Barney slammed on the brakes and the engine cut out. He didn't know if it had stalled or if unseen forces were at work. Whatever the reason, their car refused to restart. The terrified couple got out of the car, but Barney found himself compelled to take a closer look. As he walked towards the craft, which was now clearly visible and glowing with a hypnotic, pulsating light, Barney could see creatures behind a row of windows. They were watching him as intently as he was fascinated by them. He did not hear Betty plead, "Barney, come back! Don't go!" As he got closer, he could make out their humanoid shapes and shiny black jackets. But the worst thing was their eyes, ice blue, slanted and malevolent, which sent a chill of horror down his spine. Then Betty somehow managed to break him free from his spellbound fascination, and the couple climbed back into their car as their tidal wave of terror slowly ebbed away. Sadly, however, it was only the beginning of their nightmare. Somehow they had lost 2 hours, and when they realized what had happened, they were 35 miles farther south than they should have been. Both felt numb and confused, aware that something had happened, but not quite sure what. Neither could account for the missing time or distance. 10 days later, Betty began to have horrible nightmares, dreaming of strange beings, but never quite being able to remember the details of what had taken place. Barney suffered curious pains in his stomach and groin. Desperate, they sought the help of Dr. Benjamin Simon, one of America's foremost mind doctors. He put them through weeks of intensive interrogation under hypnosis, and eventually the full horror of that weird meeting of worlds emerged. The couple had not, as they thought, managed to flee. They had been abducted in a trance-like state and had been subjected to a series of medical examinations inside the alien craft. Betty revealed how the creatures took samples of her skin and hair and nails. Stripped naked, she was examined from head to foot by an alien with a cluster of needles, causing excruciating agony, which only eased when another alien rubbed his hands together in front of her eyes. Barney recalled being taken into an examination room where a sort of cup was placed over his groin. He felt the coldness of the object, but no real sensation of pain. They took out his false teeth and examined them, but were frustrated when they tried to do the same to Betty, whose teeth were real. They communicated as if by telepathy, although they did speak an unintelligible language, which sounded like a babble to Barney. When they had finished, he felt strangely happy and reassured that they would cause him no harm. Just before being freed, the couple were given a hypnotic suggestion that they would remember nothing about their time aboard the UFO. Years later, Betty drew from memory a star map shown to her by the aliens, which indicated their star of origin, Zeta Reticuli. Scientists and UFO specialists have remained divided in their opinions of the Hills' testimony over the years, but the couple always appeared totally sincere when relating their experiences during interviews. They have never wavered in their account by a single word. Theories abound which attempt to explain the phenomenon of UFOs. Why have UFOs been confirmed on radar when they have been invisible to the naked eye? Why do some people innocently fall victim to the visitors from outer space, while others may spend a lifetime desperately scanning the skies for proof positive that UFOs exist and never see a thing? UFO expert and author John Keel believes that a large part of the phenomenon is hidden from us. We can only see the objects and the entities under certain circumstances, he says. Perhaps only certain types of people can see them at all. There are strange forces which are almost beyond our powers of comprehension. Whatever the explanation, anyone who has actually seen a UFO or worse, had a close encounter with one, will never forget the experience. For many, as in the cases which follow, it can change their lives forever. A bolt of blue light fired from an alien spaceship shot across the night sky, hitting forestry worker Travis Walton squarely in the chest. According to his terror-stricken friends, he was picked up and tossed backwards like a limp rag doll. The journey had begun like almost any other for Travis and his forestry gang as their pickup truck bounced down the remote winding road into the gathering gloom of the Apache Sitgrave National Forest near Snowflake, Arizona on the 5th of November, 1975. Until, that is, they rounded a bend to be confronted by a terrifying sight that was to change all their lives. Never in their wildest dreams would any of the men have expected that danger was fast approaching from another world. Mike Rogers, who was at the wheel, saw it first. Hovering 15 feet above a clearing in the woods was a glowing, yellowish object. Rogers stamped on the brakes, and the pickup skidded to a halt, bathed in the eerie yellow gold light. All the men were transfixed except Travis Walton. He leapt out of the vehicle to take a closer look, ignoring the pleas of his friends to get back in the truck. The guys were calling me, saying, "Get away from there! Get back here!" says Travis. I guess that egged me on. I was frightened, but I was showing off a bit, too. Then the searing bolt of light flashed across the night sky, picking Travis up off his feet and throwing him backwards. In the truck, fear took over, forcing the burly loggers to think only of their own lives. Rogers gunned the accelerator, and the pickup screamed off into the night like a bat out of hell. Travis later recalled, "When the bolt hit me, it was like an electric blow to my jaw, and everything went black. I woke up and I thought I was in hospital, but I could see 3 figures who weren't humans. They looked like fetuses, about 5 feet tall, and they wore tight-fitting, tan-brown robes. Their skin was white like mushrooms, but they had no clear features." When Walton's friends reached town, they alerted police and a massive search was launched. But when they returned to the scene of their close encounter, the strange craft had vanished, along with Travis. The police even began to suspect the 6 loggers of murdering their friend and concocting the bizarre story to cover their tracks. Then, 5 days later, out of the blue, Travis reappeared. He telephoned his sister from a phone box in a neighboring town, disoriented, shaken, and with no recollection of where he had been for the missing days. Later, under hypnosis, he was able to reveal his strange experience. He said, "I know people won't believe me, but I was in their spaceship and I met those creatures. We all saw the saucer that night. But I was just so excited I wanted to get a better look and ran out from the truck. When they took me aboard, I guess I panicked and tried to smash a kind of transparent tube to use as a weapon, but it wouldn't break. I saw one human-like man who just smiled at me. The others scampered away. I could feel that we were moving, and I knew we were in a spaceship. Then things went black again. When I woke, I was at the highway, feeling shaky. I recognized I was in a village a few miles from my home, and I called my sister." Travis never changed his account of those fateful 5 days, and his story was subsequently made into a major film, Fire in the Sky, starring actor James Garner. Before taking the role, Garner spent hours talking about the incident with Travis. He concluded, "I believe him. If I didn't, I wouldn't have touched the role with a barge pole." A Brazilian farmer plowing his fields in the cool of an early October evening in 1957 fled in terror when a massive egg-shaped object began to hover over his tractor. Antonio Villas Boas only managed to run a few paces before someone, or rather something, grabbed his arms. Boas was carried, screaming towards what he could now clearly see was an alien spacecraft by 4 kidnappers, each about 5 feet, 4 inches tall. My speech seemed to arouse their curiosity, for they stopped and peered attentively into my face every time I spoke, he said. Once inside the strange craft, Boas was examined by an excited group of aliens who chatted away in a series of barks, slightly resembling the sound of a dog. Boas was then forcibly stripped naked, and a glass flask with a nozzled tube was applied to his skin. He watched, amazed and terrified, as the flask began to fill with his blood. Then it was moved to his chin, and again blood was withdrawn. The skin was grazed, leaving a wound which a doctor later identified. When they had finished their examination, Boas was left in a room which filled with a choking gas, forcing him to vomit in one corner. Then the horrible ordeal took a bizarre, and for Boas, exciting twist. A door opened and a naked blonde woman joined him on the couch where he was recovering. She had large blue eyes, which seemed to slant outwards, a straight nose, high cheekbones, almost invisible thin lips, and a sharply pointed chin. Despite the trauma of his abduction, Boas could not prevent himself from having sex with her. He felt the aliens must have given him some powerful aphrodisiac to make his performance possible. When it was over, the woman pointed at her stomach and then at the sky. Boas took this as a sign that he had been used by the aliens for an experiment in earthling reproduction, and that somewhere in space he might be the father of a hybrid child. He was to pay for his pleasure, though. The following day his arms and legs broke out in sores, and his face became speckled with yellowish spots. The symptoms strongly suggested radiation poisoning, or, at the very least, exposure to radiation. Housewife Madge Bai was making her way quietly to a church service on Christmas morning in 1965 when the festive calm was suddenly shattered by a loud crackling sound coming from above her head. Before she could look up, she was hurled against the churchyard wall and pinned there as though by invisible fingers of sound. She was frozen into a temporary state of shock. The weird crackling sound also paralyzed a child's pet dog. When the frightened youngster tried to carry her dog indoors, she too was affected, her limbs starting to shake violently and uncontrollably. It was just one in a series of strange phenomena reported in the skies above Warminster, England, around this time. Reverend P. Graham Phillips said he and his family had often seen a brightly glowing, cigar-shaped object hovering above the town. Another local, botanist and geologist David Holton, spoke of seeing a flock of pigeons suddenly killed in flight for no apparent reason. He examined the birds as soon as they hit the ground, and amazingly found that rigor mortis had set in almost instantly. There can be only one explanation which is at all possible, he said. This is neither natural nor supernatural. It is extraterrestrial. All the evidence points that way. The mystery of the dead birds had an eerie parallel in July 1975 when 15 ponies were found dead on Dartmoor. Their bones were crushed, their ribs were cracked, and their flesh had rotted away to leave bare skeletons in only 48 hours. UFO investigators combed the area with Geiger counters and metal detectors after police and animal experts declared themselves baffled. They found no evidence of radiation, but their leader, John Wise, said, "I think the ponies were crushed by an anti-gravity field of a flying saucer when it took off." On the other side of the Atlantic, top UFO investigator Dr. J. Allen Hynek was called in when a number of farm animals were found mutilated in Minnesota in 1973. There were no human footprints near the dead animals, and no sign of earthly predators. Internal organs had been removed as if by surgery, and some of the 22 dead cattle had been drained of blood. Flames belched from the large diamond-shaped UFO which confronted Vicki Landrum, her grandson Colby, and her best friend Betty Cash as they drove home to Dayton, Texas, on the 29th of December, 1980. Mrs. Landrum said later, "I really thought it was the end of the world." The two women got out of their car to marvel at the strange craft lighting up the night sky as they were held trance-like for 15 minutes. I felt my eyes starting to burn, and I called Betty to get back in the car, but she was standing there entranced," said Mrs. Landrum. Every so often they heard a loud rushing noise, like air brakes, and larger flames spewed from the UFO, scorching down towards the road. Each time it lifted slightly, then settled back. Eventually it rose slowly before disappearing at high speed into the night sky. All three began to feel sick within an hour of getting home. The two women's skin turned bright red, and their eyes began to burn and weep. Large lumps began to form all over Mrs. Cash's body. Her hair fell out in handfuls, and she suffered agonizing headaches. She was soon too weak to get out of bed and was admitted to Houston's Parkway Hospital. During 4 weeks of intensive tests, doctors tried to find out what was wrong with her. They kept asking if I was a burn victim, she said. Skin was peeling off my arms and legs and face. I was blistered all over. My ears and eyes were so swollen, my own family did not recognize me. Mrs. Landrum also suffered terrible eye problems, and her hair fell out in tufts. Colby, who stayed in the car, suffered stomach pains and for weeks was haunted by terrible nightmares, which left him screaming in fear. UFO investigators reported that a similar diamond-shaped craft had been seen 30 minutes earlier by 3 people driving 20 miles further east. Mrs. Landrum was hypnotized to try to unlock more information about the weird encounter. Clutching at the front of her blouse and sweating with panic, she gasped, "We couldn't get through. It's blocking the road. The whole thing's burning up. Oh my God, it's coming closer. We're going to burn up." Dr. Leo Sprinkle, a professor of counseling at Wyoming University, said, "There is no doubt she had a real experience. I believe the craft was under intelligent control." A radiologist who examined their records said the women were apparently suffering the symptoms of radiation poisoning. Betty Cash later developed breast cancer. Many experts agreed they had been exposed to some sort of unshielded nuclear source, whether it was extraterrestrial or an unidentified man-made creation. The two women sued the U.S. government for $20 million, claiming that if officials refused to believe in UFOs, then the object must have been man-made. But the case was dismissed on the grounds that the military had no such object in their possession. One question the courts could not answer, however, was, if the object was not man-made, just who was operating a nuclear device in the night skies above Texas. One case has baffled both police and UFO experts for years. It concerns a down-to-earth miner who vanished while on a simple errand to buy potatoes from a shop only 200 yards from his home in northern England in June 1980. Zygmunt Adamski was a quiet Polish exile whose spare time was spent almost entirely caring for his wife, Lottie, who was confined to a wheelchair. When his half-naked body was discovered on top of a coal tip 5 days after he set out on his errand, local police were confounded by a series of seemingly inexplicable events. How did Adamski come to be on top of a coal tip where smooth sides showed that no one had climbed it? Why was his semi-naked body so spotlessly clean? Despite his filthy surroundings, he looked as if he had just walked out of a shower. Why were his trousers ripped to shreds and his shirt missing? And how did he vanish from a tightly knit community for 5 days without anyone seeing him? Some of those questions could have their answers in the bizarre events recorded by Police Constable Alan Godfrey, the first officer called to the scene. He revealed that he had been transfixed by what looked like a flying saucer only hours before the body was discovered. It was an object about the size of a bus, floating 5 feet off the ground. The bottom half of the shape was spinning, and he could see rows of windows and a dome on the top. He couldn't alert his station because neither his car radio nor his walkie-talkie would work. He kept quiet for fear of ridicule until the body was discovered. The mystery deepened when it was discovered that although Adamski had apparently died of a heart attack, parts of his corpse were found to have been burned with a corrosive substance scientists could not identify. Many people believe to this day that he had been frightened to death by creatures from outer space. At the inquest, coroner Mr. James Turnbull said, "This is quite the most mysterious death I have ever investigated. As a coroner, I cannot speculate, but I must admit that if I was walking over Ilkley Moor tomorrow and a UFO came down, I would not be surprised. I might be terrified, but not surprised." Perhaps Zygmunt Adamski had become one of the few, maybe one of the many, who have paid the ultimate price for their close encounter with beings from another world. Those who have not experienced a close encounter with a UFO remain doubting, yet with more than 100,000 million stars in our galaxy alone, it is surely not beyond possibility that other life forms exist somewhere in the great beyond of space. For betting men, it is worth noting that even bookmakers are taking the possibility of aliens contacting Earth a little more seriously. They have slashed the odds of it happening from 500 to 1 to just 33 to 1. But then those who actually have encountered aliens from outer space don't view the visitations as a game of chance. Those who have witnessed the unthinkable remain vigilant, earnest, and scared.